You may think that these masail do not relate to you, but they could be relevant for your parents, your family members. Or we can suffer from such a disease or illness or some disabilities whereby we may have to sit on the floor or sit on the chair. So it's important to learn the masail. So inshallah, some of the masail, I will go over them again, and then additional masail will be added inshallah. And probably in the coming 2-3 weeks, we will only be covering the masail of sitting on the chair or sitting on the floor. First of all, remember, qiyam is fard. Standing up and praying your salah, it is fard. It's an integral part of our salah. It is an essential pillar of our salah. Allah Jalla wa Ala says in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَقُومُوا لِلَّهِ قَانِتِينَ. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, stand before Allah Jalla wa Ala with devotion, with obedience. Standing is fard. In salah, it's an integral pillar of our salah. So salah is invalid if you do not stand up and pray. As Sayyiduna Jabir bin Abdullah radiyallahu ta'ala who narrates in the hadith of Sahih Bukhari, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam would offer his prayer on his conveyance, on his mount. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يصلي على راحلته حيث توجهت فإذا أراد الفريضة نزل فاستقبل القبلة. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam would sit on his mount and offer the prayer whichever direction the camel or the horse was. But whenever Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would intend to offer the fard prayer, the beloved sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would descend, would come down and offer the fard prayer. Why? Because it's necessary to stand in the fard prayer. In nafil prayers you can sit down, but in the fard prayer we must stand. Standing up is fard. In salah, which is fard, and the wajib prayer, like the witrs of Isha, qiyam is fard, standing up is fard, or the 2 sunnahs of Fajr. So if a person does not stand up, salah will be invalid. There are many other hadiths of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam regarding this, that if it is impossible for you to stand, then you can sit down, and if it is impossible for you to sit on the floor, then you can even lie down on your side, like the hadith in Sahih Bukhari. Sayyidina Imran bin Husayn radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he narrates عن إمران بن حسين رضي الله تعالى عنه قال كانت بي بواسير فسألت النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم عن الصلاة فقال صل قائما فإن لم تستطع فقاعدا. Sayyidina Imran ibn Husayn radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he said that I said to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, I'm suffering from piles. What is the ruling of salah for me? The beloved sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, offer your prayer standing up. And if it is impossible for you, if you're unable to stand up, then sit down. So standing up is fard. If it is impossible for you to stand, then you can sit down. What are the 2 scenarios I mentioned? Do you remember the 2 examples, 2 general principles? Because I want everyone to understand these principles. To me, these chairs, placing the chairs in salah without learning the masail, the detailed masail, this is a bid'ah muharrama. It's a reprehensible, haram innovation. So many people, they take advantage of these dispensations, the concessions in Sharia, the rukhsa in Sharia, just because the rukhsa is for those who have disabilities. People take advantage of this, and healthy people or people for whom it is impermissible to sit on the chair, they sit on the chairs and pray their salahs. And you see this bid'ah is spreading everywhere. This innovation is spreading everywhere in all the masajid without studying the masail. So I want you to memorize these masail, understand the sequence of these masail, and inshallah we will publish a booklet on this that you can take to the masjid. And even if people are sitting on the chair, on the side of the chair, or even like the people have this, like a table on the chair, these masail should be written on this. At least learn the practical method of offering the prayer. And we should ask ourselves, which category do we fall into? Is it permissible? There is a possibility that it may be permissible for you to sit on the floor and pray, but it may not be permissible for you to sit on the chair. And I've mentioned examples in which you can just stand up and offer the entire prayer by gestures. According to Imam al-Hasqafi in his Adur al-Mukhtar, he mentioned this, and also in Munyatul Musalli and the Sharh of Munyatul Musalli, Ghunyatul Mutamalli. These masail are mentioned in detail. There are possibilities of that. Or there's a possibility of sitting on the chair, or there's a possibility of sitting on the floor and offering the prayer. So these masail are important. Ilm is fard, it's necessary, you have to study. It's necessary knowledge. So let us go through the two major scenarios. The first thing I mentioned was that if a person is able to stand, but is incapable of performing sajda and ruku, or is unable to perform the sajda only, then such a person is exempt from qiyam. So remember the first example. Memorize the first scenario. First example. One is able to stand. One is able to perform qiyam. He can't stand up, but is unable to perform sajda. The inability of performing sajda will revoke the obligatoriness of standing up. The mandatory standing up is omitted for him, is dropped for him. If it is impossible for a person to perform sajda, he can stand, but he cannot perform sajda. So since he cannot perform sajda, standing up is no longer fard upon him. That's the first example. So first scenario is a person can stand physically, he's healthy enough to stand, but he cannot perform sajda. That's the first example. The second example is when a person cannot stand up, unable to stand, but this person can perform sajda. Cannot stand, but can perform sajda. That's the second example. So have you memorized the first two examples now? What's the first example? The person is able to, but unable to perform sajda. And the second example is the person is incapable of standing, but is capable of performing sajda. Two general principles. Memorized? Understood? Everyone has learned them? You all understood these, yes? Now let us understand the rulings regarding this. And do remember this now. Observe your family members, your relatives, other friends that you know, that you will go and teach them this mas'ala. Because this mas'ala is about our salah. Yes? You do not want your grandparents to be offering the prayer and you have someone who has the knowledge or is in contact with people who can teach them the masail of fiqh, but it is because of our negligence, our laziness, we did not teach them these masail of fiqh. Because we didn't learn them ourselves, or we thought they are not relevant to us because I'm a healthy person, I stand up and I perform the salah. We need to learn these masail. So understand and memorize the two scenarios I have mentioned. And then we will see inshallah ta'ala which category of people do we fall into. So the first example is when a person is able to stand but unable to perform sajda. Yes? The second is when a person is unable to stand but is able to perform sajda. If a person can stand but cannot perform sajda, then the mandatory standing up is dispensed with for such a person. The ruling of fardiyya is cancelled. Now he doesn't have to stand up. But the fact that he doesn't have to stand up, as the fuqaha say, saqat anhu wujub al-qiyam. The obligatoriness of standing up is now revoked for him, is nullified, is omitted. Yes? But that doesn't mean that he can't stand up. He can still stand up and pray his salah. It's no longer fard upon him. The fact that he cannot perform sajda, that drops the ruling of the obligatoriness of standing up, meaning it's no longer, because he can't perform sajda, now he doesn't have to stand up according to our school. Yes, the four madhahib of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, the Hanafis, the Shafi'is, the Malikis, the Hanbalis. If you're a Hanafi, then follow your school. If you're a Shafi'i, then follow your school. If you're a Hanbali, then follow your school. If you are a Maliki, then follow your school. These are the four reliable schools of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah. What do we mean by inability of performing the sajda? Unable to perform sajda. Remember, one inability is haqiqi and one is hukman. One is the haqiqi, the actual inability of performing sajda. What is that? It's impossible for him to go in the state of sajda. It's impossible for him to perform sajda. And hukman, the second possibility is, it is possible for him to perform sajda, but when he performs sajda, it causes immense pain, severe pain, unbearable pain. Or when a person performs sajda due to the disability, illness, back pain, other medical conditions, or pain in the knees, or a person has some sort of a blister or an abscess in his throat, and because of that, that may burst because of the sajda. or a Muslim expert physician who is an upright, righteous person, pious person, and who is not an open sinner, has confirmed that if you were to perform sajda, that will then intensify the illness. It will increase the illness, or the healing process will be prolonged. It will take longer for the person to be cured. So an expert, a medical doctor, a physician who is an expert, and he's a Muslim, and he's a pious Muslim, he's not an open sinner, has confirmed that because of sajda, the sajda will exacerbate the medical condition, or it will prolong the healing process. It will take longer for you to be cured. If this has been confirmed, that shows that it is impossible for you to perform sajda. So one impossibility is that you cannot even go in the state of sajda. The second is hukman. That is that you will experience immense pain, or the illness will increase, or it will take longer for you to be cured. That shows now you are exempt. Now you no longer have to perform sajda. If you do not have to perform sajda, then that will also nullify the obligatoriness of standing up. Now you don't have to stand up. What do we mean by impossibility? One example of impossibility of performing sajda I have mentioned. You cannot perform sajda on the floor, on the ground, directly, or you cannot perform sajda on the floor, on an elevated platform, on a hard surface like a table or a stool or some rock, the height of which is not more than 9 inches. The fuqaha say 12 fingers. 10 fingers and 2 fingers on top, that is about 9 inches, which is 22 centimeters. Either you perform sajda on the floor, or something that is attached to the floor and it is elevated, it is higher, and the height of which is not more than 22 centimeters. If it is 22 centimeters or less than 22 centimeters, then you can perform sajda on that. Even that is sajda which is an actual sajda. This will not be regarded as al-ima, al-ishara. It's not ishara, it's not al-ima. That's haqiqi sajda. That's an actual sajda. Why am I emphasizing this? Because if you're doing ishara and you're leading the prayer, those who are behind you cannot offer the prayer. The muqtadi, if he's not doing ishara, if the muqtadi is performing the actual sajda, actual ruku, and the imam is doing the ishara, the prayer is invalid. So you cannot lead the prayer. The imam cannot be a person who does ima, who does ishara, and the muqtadi is performing the actual prayer. But what if the imam performs sajda on something which is higher than the ground? The maximum height of that is 22 centimeters or 9 inches. Then that is haqiqi sajda. That's actual sajda. Let me finish the masail first and then send the questions. Let me finish the usul first. So stop texting me, ahibba. So, because if once you've understood the principle, then inshallah the juz'iyat of fiqh, they will become easy for you. They're easy to understand. So, if a person can stand up and pray but cannot perform sajda, now it's permissible for that person not to even stand up. He can sit down. So you understood what I mean by inability of performing sajda, either directly on the ground, on the floor, or even on an elevated platform, the maximum height of which is 22 centimeters. If it is less than 22 centimeters, perfect. If it is directly on the floor, perfect. But if it's more than 22 centimeters and you perform sajda on that, then that's not sajda which is haqiqi. That's ishara. That's performing sajda by gestures. Now keep in mind the two scenarios I mentioned. Yes, I'll repeat that once again. The person is able to stand, but unable to perform sajda. And the other is the person is unable to stand, but is able to perform sajda. Now we mentioned the masā relating to the person who is able to stand, but unable to perform sajda. And we have discussed the inability, incapability of performing sajda also. Directly on the floor or on a hard surface which is higher than the floor, but it is the maximum height of which is 22 centimeters. He can't even do that. Now he doesn't have to stand up. Now that he doesn't have to stand up, that doesn't mean that he can't stand up and pray. He can. It's not fard upon him to stand up and pray. What options does he have now? He has 3 options. What is the best option for him? The best option for such a person is to offer his prayer while sitting down on the floor. That's the best option. The second option, he can stand up or he can sit on the chair. He can stand up or he can sit on the chair and offer the prayer with gestures. The ulama say, for such a person, it is best, it is better, more rewarding, it is mustahab. There's a greater reward for him to sit on the floor and offer the prayer. Why? The ulama say, because that position is closer to the position of sajda, sitting down on the floor. The Shafis will not agree with that. The Shafis say, they will say that you have to stand up because they believe that the inability of performing sajda does not drop the hukum of standing up. But the Hanafis say that because he is unable to perform sajda, therefore it's no longer obligatory upon him to stand up and offer the prayer. Now that it's not obligatory, but it is still permissible, it's mubah, he can stand up and he can also sit on the chair. But what's best for this person? The person who is unable to perform sajda, he doesn't have to stand up. But if he does stand up and offers his prayer by gestures, still permissible. If he sits on the chair, still permissible. But what is afdal? What has more reward? If he was to offer the prayer while sitting on the floor, and then by gestures he will lower his head for ruku, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, Sami Allahu liman hamida, and he will bend his head more for Subhana Rabbiyal Ala. You don't have to bend your back. Remember that, yes? That's the example for the one who has the ability of standing but cannot perform sajda. In sha'a salla qa'idan bil ima'i wa in sha'a salla qa'iman bil ima'. Such a person, if he wants to, he can perform salah in the state that he's standing up by gestures, or he can sit down and pray salah by gestures. Al-ima'u qa'idan afdal. Why? لِقُرْبِهِ مِنَ السُّجُودِ. That for this person, ishara, gestures, while sitting down is afdal, is more rewarding. Why? Because that position is closer to the position of sajda. You're closer to the position of sajda. There's a greater reward in this. And this is also in Ad-Durr al-Mukhtar. He says, Imam Haskaf, he says, وَهُوَ أَفْضَلِ مِنَ الْإِمَاءِ قَائِمًا لِقُرْبِهِ مِنَ الْأَرْضِ. That there's a greater reward in sitting on the floor and performing the prayer by gestures. Why? Because it is closer to the ground. Ground is where you perform your sajda. Now let's move on to the second example. The second example is that you're able to perform sajda, you're able to perform ruku, you're able to perform sajda, but you're unable to stand up. What's the inability of standing up? What do we mean by impossibility of standing up? The person cannot stand up. One is haqiqatan. You can't stand up at all. It's impossible. The moment you stand up, you know that you will fall down due to old age, weakness, physical illnesses, disease, disabilities. It is impossible for you to stand up, not even for a moment. The fuqaha say, which I covered previously as well, that if a person can stand up for a moment, it's necessary for him to stand up for one moment. Even if a person can stand up for the time it takes to read Allahu Akbar, then he must stand up for the time it takes to read Allahu Akbar. If a person was to stand up leaning against the wall, he must stand up. If a person was to stand up holding a walking stick, a staff, then he must lean against that, or lean against the wall, or hold something. His relatives, his family members, or an attendant, he can lean against them and stand up. If he doesn't stand for the duration of his ability of standing up, his salah is invalid, whatever the cause may be. If a person can't stand even for one moment, he must stand. For instance, if a person can stand for 30 seconds and he stands for 15 seconds and then sits down, the prayer is invalid. He must stand for the time he is able to stand. And if it is impossible for him to stand, then he can sit down. But can he sit on the chair? No. Inability of standing up does not permit sitting down on the chair. Why? Because he's unable to stand, but he's able to perform sajda. And sitting on the chair, you will not be able to perform sajda, because you will perform sajda by gestures. So you have to perform sajda. Many people who cannot stand up, like elderly people, they cannot stand up. What do? They sit on the chair and offer the prayer. Impermissible. Prayer is invalid. If you cannot stand up, if it is completely impossible, and there can be many reasons, disabilities, illnesses, dizziness, whatever it is. If you are able to stand up even for a moment, for the time it takes to read Takbiratul Ihram. Allahu Akbar. So the time that it takes to recite Takbir Tahrima, you can't stand, you must stand for that time. Or you have a family member who can help you, or you can lean against the wall. Whatever you can do, you must stand. This is an integral pillar of Salah, standing up. But if it is impossible for you to stand, or the other mas'ala I mentioned, that the possibility of the urine drops, because of that, if you were to stand up, you have this condition that will invalidate the prayer, invalidate the wudu. Therefore, if you sit down and pray, then you will not have that problem. Therefore, if you sit down because of that, that's permissible. So once it's established that a person has a valid, legal, shari'i reason for not standing up, now what's the next option? A lot of people sit on the chair because they are unable to stand. The next option is, because you can perform sajda, you must sit down on the floor and pray your salah. And you must perform the ruku while sitting down. You must perform the sajda because you are able to perform sajda. Now if you were to sit on the chair and pray, prayer is invalid because you're able to perform sajda. So if you cannot stand up, then you must sit down and offer the prayer. Inability of performing sajda drops the obligatoriness of standing up. But inability of standing up does not drop the obligatoriness of performing sajda. The fact that you're unable to stand up, that doesn't mean that that drops the mandatory sajda. Sajda is fard. So therefore, you must sit down and perform sajda. What if you cannot perform sajda on the floor, but you're able to sit down on the floor? Now the ruling is the ruling of al-istihbab. What's more rewarding? If you cannot stand up, nor can you perform sajda on the floor. Now if you were to sit on the chair, is the salah valid? Yes, it is valid. But what is better? What is more rewarding? To sit on the floor. Well done. Now by gestures you will perform ruku and you will perform sajda because you can't perform the actual sajda. Two scenarios have been presented. What's the first one? Everyone should be able to say this now, because you will go home and teach your relatives, your family members. You will go to the masajid and you will speak to the elderly people with a lot of respect. Because as I mentioned before, the chair is a mas'ala for the politicians. The chair is a mas'ala for the peers and the maulvis. The chair has now become a mas'ala for the muqtadis as well in the masajid. Where is my chair? And it causes so much arguments and disputes, and the babaji doesn't even know that his prayer is invalid because there's no one there to tell him. So I don't want you to become arrogant just because you've learned some masail and you go and cause disputes and arguments in the masajid. With immense respect, a lot of love, speak to them. Have you learned the masail of sitting on the chair and establishing the prayer? If they haven't, then we must go through these masail. The ulama say that if you're able to sit on the floor and if you sit on the chair, it's more rewarding to sit on the floor. One reason the fuqaha have mentioned is to avoid pride, takabbur. Because sitting on the chair creates this takabbur. It creates this arrogance. You have this sense of superiority, that I'm superior, I'm sitting on the chair. You're ill, you're sick, you're disabled, that's why you're sitting on the chair. So don't be superior. You've understood the two examples I've presented. What's the first one? The person is able to stand but unable to perform sajda. The inability of performing sajda drops the ruling of standing up. Therefore he doesn't have to stand up. But if he does stand up, salah is valid? Yes, it's permissible. If he sits on the chair, it's permissible. But more rewarding for that person is to sit on the floor. The other scenario I mentioned was that the person is unable, incapable of standing up, but is able to perform sajda. For this person, standing up is necessary for the time that he can stand up. Yes, for the duration of his ability of standing up, he must stand up. And then after that, he can sit down because he has no choice. But if it is impossible for him to stand up, then sit on the floor and establish your prayer because he has to perform sajda. But then if he can't even perform sajda, then sit on the floor. It's more rewarding to sit on the floor and offer the prayer by gestures. But if he can't even sit on the floor, now he will sit on the chair. What are the rulings regarding salah with jama'ah? If a person has a valid reason to sit on the chair, in light of these fiqhi masail that I've mentioned, the principles that I've presented, if it is permissible for a person to sit, generally for a person to sit, then what I recommend in salah with jama'ah, if you have these two options, you have the option of sitting on the chair or sitting on the floor, and you can sit on the floor, then sit on the floor when you perform Salah with Jama'ah. Do not sit on the chair. Sit on the floor. Why? Because sitting on the chair affects the straightness of the rows. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, فَإِنَّ تَسْوِيَةَ الصُّفُوفِ مِنْ عِقَامَةِ الصَّلَاةِ. For indeed, straightening the sufuf is from the iqamah of salah. Straightening the sufuf is wajib in salah. Some people, what they do is, they stand up, they begin their salah while standing up. So Allahu Akbar, Subhanakallahumma bihamdika. And then after that they sit down. I'm not referring to the one who can stand for a bit and then sits down. The ruling is different, yes? I'm talking about people for whom it's permissible to sit on the chair. So what they do is, sometimes they stand for a bit and then they sit down. What I would recommend and what's better is that if you will have a chair and you will pray on the chair, then do not stand at all. Sit on the chair and offer your prayer. Why? Because you're sitting on the chair. Why? Because you will perform the prayer with gestures, with ishara. So you will not perform sajda because you can't perform sajda. When you will sit down, when you are standing up, if you stand up, because you stand up, say that there's a saf there. You can see the line. No, don't come forward. Stand behind, right next to the chair. Right next to the chair. Now you can see if everyone else there is standing, he's in front of the saf. Do you see? One option is that he stands up like this, he's in front of the saf. But if he sits down, sit down now. Now, if you're praying, people would be looking at the saf is straight. Why? Because your back is in line with all the other people who are standing up. You see? So that saf is straight. Therefore, it's better for you to sit down and pray. The other option for him would be to push his chair back. If he was to push his chair back, that would affect the prayer of the people behind him. Where will they perform the sajda? And the other thing is, the saf is not straight again. Why? Because he's behind the saf. So if he stands up and offers the prayer, he says that I'm standing up and the saf is straight. But when you will sit down, you will be behind the saf. Therefore, those who will sit on the chair, it's best for them to sit down and offer the prayer. First option is to sit on the floor. If you can't sit on the floor, for instance, if a person can sit on the floor but cannot perform sajda, then he should sit on the floor. And in jama'ah, sitting on the floor here is given preference. But if you can't sit on the floor, you have to sit on the chair, then do not stand for a bit. Yes? For the one who cannot perform sajda, because he is exempt from standing up now. For such a person, he should sit down. Where should you place the chairs? Should you place the chairs in the middle? No. Because then that affects the straightness of the saf again. You should place the chairs in the corner, right hand side or the left hand side. But not designated chairs for people, like 3-4 chairs for some committee member or the president of the masjid or some famous politician. He will always come and sit there. No. The people who will sit on the chair, they should be sitting on the side. For that masjid, when the saf is complete, and that's the last chair. If the saf is incomplete and you place the chair there and there's a gap between people, that is impermissible. So for that person, if the first saf is incomplete, he should pick up his chair and then stand next to the last person in the saf. Is that clear? Do you all understand this? So that is about salah with jamaat and sitting on the chairs. Now, sitting on the floor, what do we mean by sitting on the floor? Like the fuqaha say, ينبغي أن يقال إن كان جلوسه كما يجلس للتشهد أيسر عليه من غيره أو مساويا لغيره كان أولى. And this is something very important. If a person sits in the position, the posture of tashahhud, and is able, it's easy for him to sit like this, compared to any other positions, then it is better for him to sit in the position of tashahhud, the way you sit in tashahhud when you recite at-tahiyyatu lillah. And if it is the same, meaning if it is easier, then it is better for him to do tashahhud. And if it is the same, the ease in tashahhud position is the same in all other postures, then again the preference is given to tashahhud. But if a person cannot sit in the position of tashahhud, you can sit in any position. If you want to sit on the floor, you can sit in any position. But tashahhud is afdal. It is better. Another very important mas'ala. Some people pray their nafil prayers and they sit down and pray their nafil prayers. Remember, even though standing up is not a rukn, for the nafil prayers. What did I say in the beginning? Standing up is fard for what? For fard prayer, for wajib, and the two sunnahs, muakkada of fajr. Yes? Is standing up fard for nafil? It's not fard. So some people, because they know that standing up is not an integral pillar in the nafil, in the voluntary prayers or optional prayers, so what do? They perform their salah sitting on the chair. I'm only offering my nafil prayer. But do you know that standing up is not fard in nafilah, but sajda is fard. Even if you're offering nafil prayer, the person sits on the chair and performs nafil prayer only because he thinks that standing up is not fard in nafil prayer. Standing up is fard in what? In the fard prayer, in the wajib prayer, in the two sunnah muakkadas. So I can sit on the chair. You're sitting on the chair and offering your nafil prayer, but sajda is fard upon you. Ruku is fard upon you. And therefore, if a person was to offer his nafil prayer, then he must sit on the floor and offer nafil prayer. If he wants to sit down and pray his nafil prayer, the greater reward is in standing up and offering the nafil prayer. But what if a person is offering his nafil prayer and he cannot perform sajda? Then he can sit on the chair. But what's more rewarding is to sit on the floor and perform your nafil prayer. If you are sitting on the chair and offering your nafil prayer, nafil does not take place. Tell your parents, your grandparents, your relatives. People think that they know these masail, but they haven't studied these masail. And some of the juz'iyat of fiqh that I'm mentioning, if anyone has any questions or they want references, I will present references, because some people have a problem with this. What are you saying? You can stand up and offer your entire prayer by gestures? Yes, it is established in our school. Now, if you sit on the chair, remember you should not lean back whilst you're sitting on the chair. That's against adab of the prayer. You should not lean back. You should sit on like a chair or on a stool or something. Even if you're sitting on the chair, then do not lean back and pray your salah. Another important mas'ala, if you have some sort of wound on your forehead, and because of that you think that you cannot perform sajda, you think that because of this wound on my forehead, I cannot perform sajda, therefore I'm exempt from standing up in salah, I should sit down and offer my prayer, and by gestures I should perform my sajda. No. You must perform sajda with your nose. And if a person, because of the pain in his forehead, if a person sits on the chair or doesn't perform sajda, or was able to perform sajda by pressing his nose and doesn't perform sajda, salah is invalid. You must perform sajda by pressing your nose. Now, how do you actually perform the salah while sitting on the chair? You've all understood the examples now, the two scenarios you've understood. If you cannot stand up, on the basis of this, you cannot sit on the chair and pray your salah. If you cannot stand up, that doesn't mean you can sit on the chair and perform your salah. Yes? But if you cannot perform sajda, then you can't sit on the chair and perform your salah. Is that clear? Because if you can't stand up, then you have the option of sitting down, because inability of standing up doesn't revoke the mandatory sajda. But inability of performing sajda, it cancels the fardiyya of standing up. So if a person is incapable of standing up, can he sit on the chair and perform the salah? No. He must sit down on the floor, perform the salah, ruku, and actual sajda. And if a person is unable to perform sajda, can he sit on the chair? Yes, he can. But what's better for him? To sit on the floor. If he offers the prayer standing up, is it permissible? Permissible. If he sits on the chair and performs the prayer, is it permissible? Permissible. But if he sits on the floor and performs the prayer, is it permissible? Not only permissible, it's permissible plus mustahab, praiseworthy. There's a reward in that. Yes? So there's a greater reward for that person. But some other necessary masail, inshallah, next week, let's go through the practical demonstration of the prayer. How do you actually sit on the chair and offer the prayer? Some people have like tables in front. In Pakistan, they've made chairs. They have these tables in front. And this is a business for people now. Chair to perform sajda with a table, like a plank or a platform in front, where they perform sajda. They press their heads on that. There's no need of that. Because if you're unable to perform sajda, which is the actual sajda, then you're offering the prayer with al-ima, with ishara. And what suffices for the ishara is just to tilt your head, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim. You don't have to bend your back. Remember, you don't have to Allahu Akbar, Subhanakallahumma bihamdika, Surah Al-Fatiha, you attach a surah, and then some people go into ruku and they go down, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, and then they say, Sami Allahu liman hamida, and then they do sajda by raising their hands like that, Allahu Akbar, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim. There is no need of that. Why? You just tilt your head, Allahu Akbar, Subhanakallah, Surah Al-Fatiha, and then you attach a surah, Allahu Akbar, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim. Just bend your head a bit. Allahu Akbar, Subhana Rabbiyal, Allahu Akbar, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim. Sami Allahu liman hamida, Allahumma Rabbana wa lakal hamd. Allahu Akbar, just tilt your head more than the ruku. And that's your sajda. Some people, they perform sajda on the table. Does sajda take place like this? It does. Provided that you lower your head more than the ruku. It takes place, but there's no need of that. That's not from the sunnah. Is it kiraha tahrimiyya? Is it prohibitively disliked? Some people have said it's prohibitively disliked to perform sajda on something like this. What is prohibitively disliked? Remember, some people may present some ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or the practice of the Sahaba alayhim ridwan, the beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So a person performing sajda on something like a pillow or something, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam removed it. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, go and perform your salah, your sajda and your ruku by gestures. On the basis of this, they say it's makruh tahrimi. It's not makruh tahrimi in the Hanafi school. It's not kiraha tahrimiyya. It's not prohibitively disliked. What is that referring to? According to our fuqaha, that is if a person was to place a pillow in front of you and then you perform sajda on that, or you have picked up a pillow yourself and you performing sajda on that, that's makruh tahrimi. If you have a table in front of you and you perform sajda on that, that's not makruh tahrimi. Sajda takes place because you're doing ishara. That's another form of ishara. It still takes place. But what is the masnoon method, the sunnah method? It is that you just lower your head, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, and lower it more. That is Subhana Rabbiyal A'la. And the rest of the prayer is the same. Some people may present the hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told the Sahabi to remove what he was performing sajda on. That is, if you yourself was to place something in your hand and then perform sajda on that. But if you were to perform sajda on a hard surface which is touching the ground and its height, its maximum height is 9 inches, 12 fingers or 22 centimeters, and then you perform sajda on that, then that is regarded as an actual sajda. If you remember these two examples, inshallah ta'ala, this masail will become very easy for you. What's the first scenario? It's possible for you to stand, but you cannot perform ruku and sajda, or only sajda. On the basis of this, standing up is no longer fard upon him, is dispensed with for such a person. Yes? Is revoked for such a person. Second example is if a person is unable to stand but is able to perform sajda. And what do I mean by inability or impossibility? I have presented all the examples about this. You've got knee pain, you've got like some abscess in your throat, and the fear that it will burst, or it's completely impossible for you. But I hope this will suffice, inshallah. And this, on the basis of this lecture and this presentation, we'll publish a book, inshallah. We'll give it to you and place it in every masjid. Tell people about these masail. Allah Jalla wa ala bless us all with His divine guidance so that we can act upon the ahkam of Sharia and learn the masail of deen. Allah Jalla wa ala bless us all with istiqamah in our deen. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen. We will offer our prayer, inshallah. We'll offer the prayer in the back hall, inshallah. Study circles will take place in the back hall, inshallah.